All right, so we are back. Now we're going on to Unit 1.2. So still conceptualizing these academic literacies, right? Below your hand is up. Thank you. So continuing with conceptualizing these academic literacies, and what you have in front of you on the slides is the autonomous and ideological models of literacy, right? And then you have there is a video that's uploaded, but then there's also some notes that's uploaded. Basically, it's there's a lot of content, there's a lot of theory that puts into this, and I'm trying to simplify it for you as much as I can. So we're looking at various discourses that we use, the communication that we use, the set of skills that we have, whether it's scientific, technical, do we know academic skills, do we know how to write, how to read, how to do anything that is within an academic setting, because this module is about research supervision, and you are going to impart what you have learned here to your students, or you as a student would like that knowledge to be imparted onto you, because we learn from it. We learn to grow and we improve on our research journey, right? So looking at the ideologies, it's where we come from, who we are, and what we instill into how we write and how we read and how we conduct ourselves as individuals. Um, we always say that communication is important. Sometimes we get lost in translation because you have people that are bilingual, multilingual. We're going to look at something that's called translingual. The first time I picked up that concept was by looking at this module and teaching it. So the communication that comes about from the various languages that are being spoken, because as I mentioned, English is not everyone's first language. And I'm sure some of you that are sitting here today, English may not be your first language. You were taught to speak and to communicate in a certain way from the time that you were born. And then you go into a primary school setting where you now have to learn English reading, writing, and so on, communication skills, right? Because a lot of us went to English medium schools, and obviously primary language, main language is English, and we had to learn that. We had to also read and write in English. So a lot of people with those barriers, being English not their first language, would obviously struggle to write. Coming into it, whether it's a secondary institution or a tertiary institution, I've noticed this with some of my students and their writing, in that, as Tony mentioned, you're coming from different universities, and for example, you're coming from different tertiary institutions from all over Africa, and sometimes you don't have to write in English, you don't have to communicate in English. We do here in South Africa. You present your master's and your PhD dissertation and thesis in English. But in other countries in Africa, it is acceptable to present your work in your native language. Common languages, other common languages, such as in North Africa and stuff, is French and Portuguese. Um, and you can write in French and Portuguese, and you present your work, you submit it, uh, your master's dissertation and theses and publications and so on, in various different languages. When you are looking at resourcing publications and you want references, and you go to Google Scholar, or you use the UJ database or your library database from your various institutions, you will notice that some of the medium that is used, the language that is not English. And then what do we tend to do? because we have all these AI tools at our disposal, we then start translating. First, we go to Google Translate or we go to Copilot. We start translating that paper that was in French or that paper that was in Japanese or whatever language it is in. You're converting that now because you found something that's worth reading that is related to your studies. You want to use it and reference it in your studies, but you first have to convert it because we all not bilingual and multilingual and translingual. We don't know every single language that's out there. But again, it's how we communicate. We learn to read and write first in our own home languages before we learned English. Like I said, all of us, English is not the first language. So these are the things that we have to look at when it comes to academic literacy, how we communicate, how we write. We've got to look at our cultural background. We've got to look at the language that we use. We stem from learning one language to writing in another language, and then also writing in the language gets confusing. I have a PhD student, which is now who's now lecturing in our department. Um, he just got his PhD. He did his master's and PhD. Well, actually, his BTech, his master's, and his PhD with me. And um, he's Congolese. He's from DRC. And obviously, they speak French, they write in French, they communicate in French. And he actually, in his master's and his PhD, even when he's publishing, because he published quite a few papers with me, even before he did his master's, at his BTech level, we were publishing with students, their projects. He would write in French because he was so used to writing and communicating in French. And then he would, from writing in French, he would then translate it into English so that he can actually publish, because our medium that we use in South Africa and for submissions is English. Even his thesis and his dissertation, he was writing it in French and then he had to obviously convert it now, translate it into English so that he could submit for exams or obviously submit to me to supervise so I could read it. But these are the things that we are looking at when it comes to literacy. And then sometimes the words that we use when you're translating or converting it, for example, from French into English, it changes some of those sentences. It changes the entire context of what you are trying to say. That is why it's preferred as a practice, a literacy practice, to try and write in English as opposed to translating it, because you're changing the entire meaning by translating it, even though you know it means the same thing in your language. Masituka?
Prof, in such situations where the student's first language is a different language, like French, as you're saying, is there
Yes, ma'am.
is there a consideration from the university of possibly then getting a co-supervisor that speaks that language as a first language?
It's a good thing that you actually asked that question. I haven't come across that at UJ. Well, not from my faculty. I'm not sure. I don't know if other faculties do that, but as a practice in our faculty, no, they have not used. It's much like having a supervisor that will serve as a translator, so to speak. You know, breaking that language barrier. Um, but I have not practiced that. I have not come into contact with anyone or know of anyone who's done that. It would be something that we should be practicing in terms of you have students and you have academics and researchers that are multilingual. Like for myself, okay, I may not use it at UJ. I am multilingual. I know 4 languages. I can write in 3. Read and write in 3. So, um, but yes, English. I was born in South Africa. My grandparents are from India, but I obviously English is my first language because we were born here. We were brought up with it. But we know our home languages as well, our cultural languages, and we can't write even though we know this, but it helps to start writing. But what I'm trying to say, Masituka, and to the rest of you is that have you tried, even when you use Copilot and the AI tools and stuff, or even Google Translate, write a sentence in your home language or your language, your country language, and then convert it or translate it into English. and see if it changes the context of that sentence as opposed to if you wrote it directly into English. But this is where we encounter problems in that we have to send our students to the writing center because these are the skills that they need to write in English, because doing that whole translation changes the concept of that sentence, and then it messes up your entire assignment or research because it's turned it into something, a different sentence from what you were actually trying to say, if you understand what I mean. So these are the kind of literacy skills that we need, because just as South Africa alone, how many languages do we have? Then you take it up into Africa, how many languages do we have? So we've got to break that communication barrier. And like you're saying, Masatuka, having that would be a great practice to start bringing that in, whether it's UJ or any other institution, academic institution, having someone that's a co-supervisor that can break that language barrier will be able to help the student. But just remember, the university practice is you still have to submit your dissertation or PhD or publications in English, you know? So these are all the things that you have to look at now when reading, writing, communicating, even when you're speaking to each other. So that's the things that we have to look at. So these are all the literacy practices that we looked at. Like I said, how you write, how you speak, how you grasp something that you are reading, that somebody gives you something to read, and do we understand? It's not only one thing to read and write, but do we understand what we are actually doing? So the autonomous and ideology models of literacy invite practitioners, academics, and researchers to question construction of healthy literacy skills, having fixed standards against which people can be shown as in deficit. So, like we said, having something cast in stone, you must write in English. You must use this format, meaning that you're disregarding somebody's own ideas and beliefs. I think that's where the ideology model comes in. The autonomous approach is simply imposing Western conception of literacy onto other cultures. Like I said, you have to write in English, you have to write in a certain way. The alternative, being an ideology approach, offers a more culturally sensitive view of literacy practices, which is what Masatuka just mentioned, is bringing in. I mean, we didn't think of bringing in a translator who serves as a co-supervisor or having a co-supervisor that speaks the same language, just so that it makes its ease of writing, its ease of academic skills for that particular student. So maybe it's something we need to actually bring about or start practicing now, because we know what a diverse institution we have, a country that we have, various cultures, various languages, and we have to obviously adapt to all that. So this is what we're looking at, and we know that that is why we speak about decolonization now, because we had too much of the Western influence in that. With myself growing up, you only had to do English and Afrikaans. We didn't have isiZulu, Sotho, and stuff being taught in the schools at that time. But now you do, where students can now take a language that they are familiar with, and it wasn't something that was imposed on us to say, you have to do this, whether you liked it or not. And you had to pass it, because if I think, I'm not sure if it's still the same. No, it should be, because my son just finished grade 12. If you fail one of the languages, you fail the entire exam. You know, and that is how important emphasis was put on those languages, and specifically the English and Afrikaans, because living in a country at that state at the time, you know. And then obviously came the democracy, decolonization, and then we adapted to the different languages that's out there, and we started adding languages to the curriculum. I think that's what the universities also need to do, in that they have short courses on languages, but it's not embedded into the actual curriculum, where you have everything's taught in English, everything's done in English, because we are an English medium university. But the universities teach in their respective languages, and it helps break cultural barriers. Any questions up until this point? Okay, I'm seeing nothing, so we can move on. The reason why I have the screen like this, it's easy for me to see whether you're putting it to flip between. If I put on presentation mode, then I lose the teams. Okay, then we are going to touch on 1.2.2, which is still under this unit. Going from academic literacy to literacies, which is plural. And the plural form indicates that students need to acquire several different kinds of literacy. For example, one of the findings of the study focused on undergraduate. Okay, so this is giving you a case study on page 9. You have what is called quantitative and qualitative literacy, and you have different forms of literacy. So students are supposed to know different types of academic literacies that's out there. So how you present your work, how you write in an academic style. So you have what is called quantitative and qualitative. Qualitative is a narrative approach where you are writing, you're narrating a story, right? So you're not showing any kind of statistical measure. You're not showing any mathematical equations or values or something that you want to visually represent, quantifying information. So writing qualitative and writing quantitative is very different. That's just an example, right? Um, Actually, you can. So I can thank you very much for that. You can monitor the hands raising and also the chats. Just let me know. You can just unmute yourself and then let me know. Okay, so this makes it much easier. Um, so from the academic literacy to academic literacies being plural, meaning that you don't just learn one particular type. So you, um, let's hear from you, right? As a researcher, and I'm sure all of you sitting here at some point in time wrote a publication, wrote a paragraph, or wrote your dissertations and theses and so on, right? Was there just one literacy type that you were using? Did you have to write to represent qualitative information? Did you have to write to represent quantitative information? How did you express yourself or express your results in terms of your writing? The type of writing that you used. Anyone? Are there any hands up? Or alternatively, you can just unmute yourselves and answer.
Okay, Doc. So my own
Yes,
doing my research, I did
yes.
qualitative, yeah.
Okay.
Doing to analyze what the participants' views, opinion, and an expression concerning my studies. So that helps me a lot to quote them according to what they understand in the areas of the studies, and that helps me a lot in terms of analyzing my findings and to conclude it. Thank you.
Because most of the time, when it's qualitative, you're assessing people's ideas, you're evaluating their ideas and their values and their beliefs, and you forming your own report and narrative based on their thoughts, right? Whereas, and it's a much harder process to actually do that write up with qualitative data, as opposed to when you are presenting actual results and measures and statistical analysis, because you're reporting straight on those results, right? But when it comes to more narrative approach, when you have to look at, you are interviewing me, so you have to report on my thoughts. So you basically conveying what I'm trying to say, and put it into a report in a story form, relaying a story. It's much harder to write. So that's why we're saying there's different types of academic literacies. That is why we said, as opposed to one way we knew how to read and write, and then now we have to change all our different styles of academic literacy practices. Anyone else?
Yes, Prof. I also think there's a big switch in, I mean, the technicality when we're looking at the academic writing style, especially from my field in philosophy. There's a lot that is required of the student, or the person, in terms of understanding the argumentative aspects of the research and argumentative strategies. So
Yes.
that is one way to say that being able to identify arguments, to articulate your own arguments, in contrast to simply just writing in a fancy language, in a creative style. We're looking for a lot more clarity. We're looking for a lot more articulation, and we're looking for simplicity. So that, I think, is something that had to be adjusted in terms of my own academic journey in postgrad.
Most definitely, because what happens is, and I've had this experience where I had to, I know nothing about your philosophy, but um, I know you'll use APA referencing as opposed to our Harvard referencing and IEEE that we use as engineering, right? I had to get used to that. And also the writing style. So a friend of mine was doing philosophy which incorporated some aspects of psychology, right? They were doing a module that was called brain morphology or something, right? And it was difficult. So everyone thinks, no, you're an academic, you can assist them with anything. And I'm like, no, we know our specific fields. I can't go and touch on psychology and stuff like that, right? But the way that you have to write, the way he was taught to write, is so different from my academic writing skills, literacy skills in engineering, because as an engineer, it's a lot more technical, producing results, proving hypotheses, doing tests, doing experiments, as opposed to philosophy and psychology. You're not doing that. You're not quantifying information. You have to take a concept, like you said, it's an argument that you have to now put across, but you're narrating. So the writing and the way, the style of writing is completely, completely different, which blew my mind because I was so used to, and I always touch on personal experiences because we learn, even as academics and researchers and supervisors, we learn every day. And I learned that it is so different in different faculties and different fields, because engineering, we know one specific way of doing research and writing in that particular way. Yes, we do qualitative and stuff like that, but to the extent of philosophy and psychology and those kind of fields, it's so different the way you have to write. um, and yeah, it varies from field to field. So can you see now how complex, and that is why we say the complexities of academic writing and academic literacies and the practices that you use, it's not always going to be the same. It will differ from the way I write to the way you write, from the way I read to the way you read, how you grasp a concept as opposed to how I grasp a concept. I would be more mathematical and you'll be more philosophical, and but we're still trying to get almost the same message across, if we're given a same topic, but our approach would be different because of our backgrounds. And that's what we're trying to say, in that you have multi, which takes us to 1.2.4 just now, which is multimodal literacies, various modes of grasping literature, I mean, literacies and practices, and how we actually incorporate that. So before we move on to 1.2.3, you have activity 1.2, which is, and there is a video that's there for you to watch. I can actually put that, let me see that it's not stuck. So the video is presenting different contrasts between old 20th century literacy views to what is currently done today. And it's stuff we've been speaking about from the morning. about how everything has changed. And we even spoke about, and I just mentioned it now, having Western views and conceptualization. And now we've decolonized that, where we have more of our culturally sensitive views, having our thoughts and ideas in there. And, we weren't just forced into Western ideals. We're now moving into our own ideals. So things that were done previously 30 years ago, 40 years ago, as opposed to what is being practiced now, is completely different. And the literacy practices from then to the literacy practices now have vastly changed. So your identity as a supervisor in relation to and adopting these new literacies, you need to watch the video and then give your views on what you have watched in terms of what has been done previously and what is being done currently. So without even watching this video and putting your own reflection in activity 1.2, put your hand up or unmute yourself, or Lorenzo, you can also just see whose hands are up. Let's just take a stab at it without even watching the video. Give me a comparison from if you've been in the situation where we're talking westernized values as opposed to new values and approaches that we have today. So look what was done in the past and what is done today. How vastly different is it? Anyone? Are there any hands up? No one wants to take a stab at that. Nothing. What have you noticed? Okay, let me take you back to your school days. Okay, let's go back. Some of you may not go as far back as me, but let's go back to school and what we did. How our literacy skills were then, as opposed to if you're looking at the generation now, our generation or your generation, compared to this 21st going on to 22nd century. Yes, Tony.
I was thinking I'd take a stab. Yeah, Prof. So something like when we look at how what was accepted in the past as a thesis has fundamentally changed. Whereas back in the past, perhaps people could not write a thesis in their home language. This is something that's becoming more and more readily accepted. With as mentioned in the comment before, that there are ways to translate it. There are members of the institution that are able to assess it. So now
Yes.
the kind of field is being opened to maybe African languages, people writing their dissertations in isiZulu, in isiXhosa, and Afrikaans has become a more common thing. So that could be one of them.
No, most definitely. Because if that's one of the examples, right, it has changed, vastly changed. In that, like you said, and with the times and with technology as well, you even have tools. You don't need a translator to be there with you. You have AI tools now at your disposal because of technology having advanced so much that does it for you, that translates for you and helps you construct your master's and your PhD and stuff like that. But the ideals.
Can I push on, Prof?
Yes, carry on.
So also when we look at the sensitivity towards indigenous practices,
yes,
and a certain sensitivity towards minorities, this has become much more, acknowledged now, whereas in the past, certain things were overlooked on the basis of generalizations or on the basis of lack of understanding.
yes. So that is where, with that understanding, because we have this gap, we have this barrier. So that is why we say now the communication is part of the literacy practice, in that how we communicate as well, how we convey our message, just by you and your colleague speaking, right? That is already a literacy practice, how you communicate, how you speak. And you may speak one language, he may speak another language. One of you may not have English as a first language. And how do you communicate? Because sometimes you do struggle when you meet people and you're trying to communicate. Instead of the breaking those barriers of communication, there's a huge gap in between. UJ also being so diverse, and we have multicultural and multimodal um, ways of teaching, we have to go towards that practice. I think we're trying, but we have a long way to go, where we have to now wean out the Western conceptualization and bring in decolonization. We're trying, but there's so much, we're a long way behind. There's a lot more we can do to help our students, especially when it comes to communication, and you've got so many different languages and breaking those barriers and so on. Okay, so you need to, activity 1.2, watch the video and then give your take on what was done in the past and what is being done now, and your own identity. Reflect on your identity as a supervisor on these new literacy skills that we have to adopt. Because as the times and the generation keeps changing, the literacy skills keep changing as well. And we always have to adapt with every generation, because remember, we as academics now, we as supervisors, put yourself in that supervisor's shoes. As generation changes and they come into our tertiary institutions, the culture changes. We have to adapt to this all the time and keep improving on our communication skills, because like I said, that whole generation gap that we have. So we have to adapt our styles as supervisors and as academics to enhance their literacy skills and what they've learned, as opposed to what is expected at a tertiary level. Then we have what is critical literacy. What is critical literacy skills is your critical reading skills and your critical writing skills. So you have to look at, we looked at having different academic literacies. Now we're looking at what are some of the critical skills that we need, the critical literacy practices that is needed. So in a nutshell, the critical literacy practices that are needed is how you speak, how you write, and how you read. Because you have to look at, as a researcher, and when you are publishing or writing your master's, writing your PhD and so on, you have to have grammatical accuracies. You have to follow certain templates, certain structural forms that you have to write in. Like, for example, we all know the generic template for writing a proposal, and you have to follow that template and write in that manner. There's a certain way in which you write up your chapter 3, for example, research methodology and design. The methods you are going to use in order to conduct the study, the data collection tools we're going to use to conduct the study, your sampling type, your sampling size, etc. So all that is like a structural flow, right? The structures that you have to follow when you are writing. So in this instance, they're saying critical skills would be reading, writing, communication, and also following those templates and structures. But obviously within your respective domains and fields, because not all of us have the same templates. In engineering, it is a bit more standardized. I think science as well, it's a bit more standardized. Even the type of referencing techniques that you use is a bit more standardized. So these are the things that we have to look at, in that with all the standardization and formats and templates that we have to follow, there's not a lot for, how do I say, flexibility in terms of you putting your words in there. You only have a lot more flexibility when it comes to literature review, where you're putting your own ideas and ideologies, right? Then you have the multimodal literacies. Multimodal literacies is various different types and structures of literacy practices that we would use. So there's a lot of references being made in terms of how do you use images, how do you write, a speech, how do you write a dissertation, how do you write a publication. So working multimodal, it's just the various modes of writing, the various modes of presenting your work, so to speak. Like for a dissertation, as I mentioned, you have visual representation, you have photographs, you have charts and diagrams, graphs, drawings. You may even do 3D models, 4D models. Okay, that's all representation. It's a way of showing these are my ideas and this is how I am presenting it. So it's a part of a literacy practice in how you present your work and the type of mode that you are using. Alternatively, we have other modes, which is a narrative report, research report, just writing a narrative, a story, explaining other views. If you've interviewed someone, explaining their views, or if you've interviewed 10 people, explaining all 10 views and how you narrate that report. You also have the style in which you present your work, which is the font that you use, the size of the font that you're using, how you actually visually present the work, right? And again, standardization. We look at, with the standardization, for those of you that know UJ processes, you either use, when it's academic writing, Arial 12 point, 12, the size is 12, font is Arial, line spacing 1.5. Alternatively, Times New Roman, still same size, 12, and your line spacing is 1.5. We all follow that. So it became like a norm. But here, what we're saying with the multimodal literacies is using any font. We should be, if I want to present, if I'm a creative person and I want to present my work in different fonts and different sizes and so on, I must be able to do that. Put my headings in different fonts, not just put the bold or underline, but I want to have it a bit more fancy. Why can't we use color? Because if you notice, and I'm saying those of you that are familiar with UJ practices, is we have standard ways of writing our headings. Put it in bold and underlined. Subheadings, italics. So it's formal structures we have to follow, but it's not what I want to do. I want to make my heading stand out a bit more. I want to use it, maybe put it in green. Why do we only have to have a font that the color has to be black? Why does it have to have black? I think the standard is black, gray, and blue for headings. Sometimes they don't even allow the blue, because I've had an examiner that mentioned my student, and I allowed it. I like colors. So I allowed it. Color should not matter. The type of font you use should not matter, because you're still getting the content and the argument across. It's the content they're supposed to be looking at, no matter how it is presented. But this is all part of writing literacy. It's not just what you write, it's how you present it as well, and is it visually appealing. For someone that's more creative and has an artistic background and is from that faculty, yes, it would make sense. Engineering, don't get me started. You just stuck with these formats and you have to follow these templates and headings and so on. Tony?
Prof, I imagine in some cases where there's a person with color sensitivity issue, like an example with, this may be a little bit of an issue, or contentious one, where
Sorry, Tony, you're
making the
breaking up.
headings.
I can barely hear you. Say that again.
Can you hear me now, Prof?
Yeah, you said it was with the color. Start from the beginning. You're breaking up from there. Hello? Have we lost you? Okay, so while we wait for Tony to come back, I think I know what he's going to say about the color and stuff like that, but we'll wait for him to come
Sorry,
back.
Prof. I think there's a problem with my audio. I will try again in a few seconds.
No problem. We'll wait for you to get back to us. Okay, so there's also a part of your notes on page 11. There's a blog that you can read, the points made by this particular author about getting a bit more insights on the different modes that you're going to use. So up until this point, and they say that exactly what I'm speaking about. Multimodal submissions raise questions for both examination of the research and storage in the university library because they want it done in a specific way. Like I said, standard format. And for someone like me, who just likes to use color and make it look pretty and bright and outstanding, it must pop out. But I don't bother about whether it's got that color and stuff because if me as an examiner, I'll look at the content, right? It shouldn't bother me. But then some examiners actually came back and said the color is distracting. Because I've had a student and I left it as, so you put it as headings when you're setting up your Microsoft Word. And then it highlights it in blue because it makes it a bit easier. You know, where you have the heading 1, heading 2, heading 3 in Word. And you update your contents page using that. It's easier to draft a contents page, right? That is why we use it. And then the examiner actually came back and I was like, but there's tools. If it's a tool that's being used to help us generate the contents page and it shows it in blue in text, what is the issue with having that color? Why is it part of Word? Why shouldn't we be using it? But examiners are very strict when it comes to those kind of things. That's where they say there's a lot of questions that's raised by examiners and also by supervisors. Don't use a specific font, don't use this color. And they say it's distracting. I don't know. For me, I have a different opinion on that. You all can weigh in on that. Colorblind or color sensitive examiners may, yes, I agree with that. That I would agree with, right? But it came back as saying it's distracting. I understand, but also we don't know what's the right or wrong answer or approach for this. So I think that is why most of these faculties just have a standardized approach, specific for font, specific size, specific line spacing, how you do your headings and so on. Even when you do publications, you will notice on the paper template it tells you type of font, how you do your headings, line spacing, how you do your margins. Everything is structured and standardized. So this is the multimodal literacies that we are talking about, is that every and different conferences, different journals have different formats. So these are all the ways in which you presenting your work, and you have to adapt to all those changes. Everyone with me? So we've been through the critical literacy skills. We looked at what is multimodal skills. You are going to now on page 11, look at the blog that is there, and much is what I raised, the different colors, different fonts. Is it distracting to the person that is reading or to the examiner, and so on. All right. Which takes us to I don't know, it keeps going. Something that we've done before. All right. Activity 1.3. So previously, the other modules that we've done, that you've done with me, we developed our own word cloud, right? In this case, it's asking you to question those word clouds and the image that you have. For this activity, you may not use a written argument. The collage image should speak for itself as far as possible. So maybe creating your own multimodal word cloud, however you want to present it, is activity 1.3. So it's given you an example of two word clouds. First representation is various types of text, and the second is the representation of reflections of teaching. After studying, then think about your own research experiences and those of the students who research you have supervised. What is your experience of multimodal literacies, and what do you know about your own students' literacies? What modes are they using? Because remember, as a supervisor, you know the type of literacies that they're using. You've seen their work and how they presented their work. You've seen their headings, their subheadings, their structures of the chapters, and so on. Even if they've published, you've seen it. So what pops out for you? Could it be to their advantage to work multimodally? To what extent and what kind of resources do they need to access? So you can represent your work in the form of a collage or an image made from newspaper or magazine cuttings. So present it however you want to present. What stands out for you? So I would suggest look at these words that stand out. Using this example, the word cloud that you have, generally what pops out are the words that are used more frequently by students and academics, right? So upload and present in your own way, however you want to present it. And it says made up from newspaper and magazine cutting. So cutting up words to stick it together to make a collage, which is a nice activity. Obviously, can't do it in class. You'll have to sit and cut out words from magazines and newspapers and portray your own kind of word cloud. Everybody with me? So that would be on page 12, activity 1.3, right? So everything needs to be uploaded on the section where it says Moodle, in your Moodle, your module, under Moodle activities, okay? And then under assignments, you have separate assignments that need to be done. How are we for time? Can we continue? All right. So any questions up until this point? Anything that you may want clarity on? I'm not seeing any hands. Thumbs up, thumbs down. You good? So can we move on to 1.3, unit 1.3, academic literacies with scholarly identity. So in the previous section, we looked at different ways of presenting your work, whether your literacy skills of the student that you are supervising is strong or weak. So you also have to identify how strong their skills are, how weak their skills are, and what you as a supervisor needs to do to enhance their skills, right? And looking at the text that you have on page 13, looking at scholarly identity, there's a deep connection between the scholarly identity and the text. We write an article in our various disciplines. We locate the work in recent literatures, which is what we do, doing a literature review. We analyze the data that we have collected from literature. We use the data to substantiate our own argument. This is where I say, state your claim and then support it by literature. Okay, we started at the beginning of the session saying that where is you as the researcher, your argument? So you put in your thoughts first, but obviously writing, again, the style of writing is in a third person. You can't write I, we, they, us. You have to write as a researcher, third person, right? So again, you're restricted in the way that you write because you have to write in a third person mode. So that is why we say putting your argument across. So writing in third person mode, put your argument across. We say state your claim. Support that claim you are making or that idea that you have put down by a reference, right? So you're substantiating the argument that you're making. We are never just writing the article. We are also similarly writing ourselves or for ourselves. We project the scholar into the page and convey a relationship with our material. So this is now trying to take the academic material that you have, the research material that you have, and relating it and linking it to your own thoughts. So here is where I mentioned at the beginning of the session, where is the you as the researcher? Where are your thoughts and your ideas that you are portraying, right? So this is where it comes out in terms of textualizing your own self, your scholarly identity. So when you are supervising your students, what is your student's identity? What is the student saying about that topic or that particular concept, supported by or substantiating using references? But always state your claim first. State what you are saying first, or what the student is saying first. Teach this to your students when you are supervising. Your thoughts and ideas need to be reflected. It needs to come out to build a good argument, then supported by references, whatever you've seen in literature. So that's basically what it's saying about having a scholarly identity. Everyone with me? Any questions? So it's bringing out you as a um, researcher, your thoughts as a researcher. All right. So there's many investigations also moving more into the academic literacy in terms of languaging. And I've got it written there. We're going into something that's called, like I said, first time I've seen something. I've seen multi-language, multilingual. We're now looking at translingual and translanguaging. And this is the first time I've come across this concept. This is on page 14 at the bottom. So looking at what is, so is my screen moving? It seems to be stuck. Everyone with me? I'm on presentation mode, but doesn't seem that way. What do you see on your screen? My screen seems to be stuck now.
We are on page 9, slide 9.
Slide 9, which is unit 1.3.
Yes.
Okay.
Now it's moved.
Now it's moved. Okay. So now we go on to, so I'm going to touch on the translanguaging because the translanguaging goes into unit 1.4, right? So I want to do the translanguaging. We take a break and then we go into more on the multilingual, trilingual, and so on, right? There's a lot to touch on there. So just to brief before we go on to 1.4, unit 1.4 is translanguaging. What is this concept of translanguaging, right? And why are we using this in research? So I thought we'd bring about a basic definition, concepts, and the translanguaging that we are looking at, the concept. Let's try and understand this better. It's a term used to describe practices that allow and encourage learners, researchers, academics to use their full linguistic repertoire in order to empower them and help them to realize their full potential. It also involves issues of language production, effective communication, the functioning of the language, and the thought processes behind how you use language, right? So it's everything to do with how you portray yourself and the language in which you use, right? I'm not sure why it's called translanguaging. Like I said, it's something I just learned and it was something I was reading up about for this session and for this lecture, building up to this lecture, trying to learn about what is this translanguaging. So I'm going to give you an exercise, right, which is not um, not in your notes, but look at those of you that are supervising or those of you that have been supervised. Do you have any practices that allow and encourage you to use your full linguistic repertoire, showing your full potential? But understand what linguistic means. What does linguistic mean? Anyone? What does the word linguistic mean? Masituka?
Thanks, Prof. So my comment is not necessarily an answer to your question, and apology to that. But I
No?
think as South Africans, one thing that we sometimes commended on is our translanguaging ability. That the ability to kind of in one sentence use Zulu, Sotho, and English, and it just flows very beautifully. Now, whether this can then be translated into academia is quite an interesting concept, because I
Yep.
don't think as yet, because would you then write the first paragraph in English and then the next paragraph in Sotho,
Yeah.
and then it just flows like that? That kind of, I don't see how.
Yeah. Or just you have to have a flow where you have to write it in ones. So if you're choosing a language, choose a specific language and say, flow with that, you know. You can't use different languages. Like you said, one paragraph is English, one paragraph is Sotho, another one is French, you know, because you are multilingual, you can't write in that format. I'm not saying can't, but it's not a practice that we would encourage. It would also make reading. So this is where the literacy practice reading difficult for the person that is looking at your work. So the linguistics that we're looking at is set of skills and knowledge a person has of one or more languages, as well as their own different varieties and cultural variances. So we know that you have, I would say, multi languages or multilingual, because it's multiple languages that we are using. Like you just mentioned, writing in different languages. I've had students where they mix up. Like we keep coming back to students. Um, English is not their first language, so they tend to mix it up in that they'll write in half English, half in another language, exactly what you just said, Masituka. And it makes it difficult, because when I'm reading, then I get a bit confused, because now it's like the student's train of thought started off with English, then in between you've got their language, and then goes back to English, and and now I don't know those languages, so how do I mark this? This is where the student has difficulty, and then I send the student to the Academic Development Center, ADC, to help the student with their writing skills, because also with their language skills, not just writing, because the person that's marking your work also needs to be multilingual. And how often does that happen where you come across someone that is multilingual? You know, it's difficult. It puts you in a difficult situation. So, yeah, things that we have to look at. Um, okay, so we've got a huge section. Seem to have gotten quite far with this. 10-minute comfort break. I also want to get some water. My water seems to have been finished. So you want a 10-minute or 15-minute break? Thumbs up. 10 minutes. Thumbs up. 15 minutes. And then we come back and we tackle this trans language. Okay. 11:10. 15 minutes. We come back 11:25. Yeah, my maths is correct. Okay. So see you back here. 11:25 to continue. Again, I'm going to stop the recordings and restart when we come back. Okay, guys, while you're still here with me,